G'day. Welcome to the Agricoach Podcast for families on the land who want to grow their family's wealth and prosperity across the generations. I'm your host, Ben Law, and I'm the financial bloke. G'day. Welcome back to the Agricoach Wealth and Wisdom Podcast, the show for families who want more than just financial success. They want to grow and protect their wealth, strengthen relationships, and maintain their success across the generations. My name's Ben Law, and I'm the financial bloke. Today, I'm joined by my old business coach and great mate, Jean-Marc Barbeau, or JM as I call him. Now, JM's got one of those interesting stories that really hits you between the eyes. He was a high-flying chartered accountant in London, running global projects across dozens of countries, managing huge teams and climbing the corporate ladder faster than most of us could imagine. From the outside, he looked like he had it all. But then came the moment of truth. He looked forward 10 years and he realised he was climbing the wrong mountain. He wasn't heading towards freedom, he's heading towards a life sentence. That realisation, combined with the tragic sudden death of his stepfather, forced James to ask the hard question, what's the point of building all this success if you never get to live it? He stepped off the treadmill, retrained, and built a business around one clear mission, helping owners create freedom now and not later. And that's exactly why I wanted to bring him on today. Because for high-performing families, the biggest risk isn't failure. It's being trapped by your own past success. The playbook that got you here, the old recipes, the habits, the beliefs, can quietly become the ceiling that keeps you stuck. And the most dangerous belief of all is the one that says, I'll live the life I want later, after harvest, after succession, and after the debt is paid, and maybe even after the kids are ready. The problem with that is, though, later never arrives. Life only ever happens in the present. So in this episode, JM and I are going to talk about why past success can become your prison, why waiting for the right time is a trap, and what really separates the businesses that break through and create freedom from the ones that stay stuck on the same old treadmill. So JM, welcome to the podcast, mate.
Fantastic. Thanks, Ben. Thanks for having me on. Been waiting for this.
Well, I think I've talked to you about this for coming on 2 years. So I finally wrangled you and said, righto, let's do it. And you've agreed. So thanks for coming on, mate.
Yeah, absolutely. No dramas. And, I remember when we were sitting down discussing you getting this launched, like all the years back. And, well done. It's been a great success.
Yeah, thanks, JM. I think I started talking about it 5 or 6 years ago, and it took me 2 years to actually pull the trigger because I was too busy, and that was for later. So that's a great segue into what we're going to talk about today. So before we really start to get into the big ideas and the deep stuff, JM, I think it's important that people understand your story. And I've sort of alluded to a bit of it in the introduction, but just to go back again, so you were in the corporate world in London. You had an amazing career ahead of yourself. You were climbing the corporate ladder. But then all of a sudden you realised, holy dooly, this is not for me. I can see where I'm going to go in the next 10 years. So can you just take us back to then and sort of go to that turning point that you had and then what it taught you about success, freedom, and what really matters?
Yeah, Ben, at the time I was working for GlaxoSmithKline, the pharmaceutical giant, and I'd risen pretty quickly, being accelerated talent and the like, and was one of the youngest directors at the time at my level. And what I looked at was I was working on a huge change and transformation project and reporting into VP, and I looked at his life. And I was young. I was still fairly young. I was in my early 30s. And he was in his mid-40s, approaching 50. And I'd get into the office at 6:30 in the morning, cycle in, go to gym beforehand. And he was there when I left in the evenings, and sometimes, that was 7:38 at night working on this project. And on top of that, every second week he was either in New York or somewhere in Europe and away from the family and that. And I thought, I'm aspiring to have his position in 5 years' time. And he must be working, 80 hours a week. And I just thought, we hadn't had kids yet or anything. And I looked ahead down the road and I thought, my goodness, I'm never going to see my family. And that was a really, really important thing for me. And so it made me reflect and think back on how I had constructed what is success in my head and in my mind and in my beliefs. And I realized that how I defined success probably wasn't going to serve me very well. It wasn't going to lead me to be successful in my life as a whole, as opposed to just my career.
So did he know that he was trapped, and was he happy with where he was, JM? Because I'm guessing you had the conversation with him at the time. How did he see his life?
I didn't actually then, to be honest. It was just one of those things that just struck me out of the blue all of a sudden. And I didn't go in and venture and have that conversation with him. I think we need to be respectful of how other people hold their lives, and really if they open the door to have that conversation. But I could see he was under a huge amount of stress. Joe was obviously really successful in terms of career, and it's hard to know what people's personal lives are too, and how he was balancing that or what he was doing. But yeah, for me it was just a thing that there wasn't enough freedom there for me to live the life that I wanted to live with the children, raising a family and having children.
And I think it's a little bit of that frog in boiling water is what I've normally seen, JM. It's for anyone who hasn't heard that analogy, you throw a frog into cold water and you sit there and boil the jug or the pot. The frog will stay in there until it dies and boils to death. But if you throw it into a hot tub of water, it'll jump straight back out again. And I think a lot of us get into business and get success, and then all of a sudden wake up 5, 10, 20 years later and you're the frog in boiling water.
Yeah, and it becomes very normal to normalize our context because everyone surrounding us is doing the same thing. So, in that corporate space or whatever, that's what was typical if you wanted to ascend to those heights or those ranks, that's the expectation, was that you're always available and that, you'd go well and above beyond the 38 and a half hours or whatever you were getting paid for. Let's get into those senior ranks. So, we very quickly normalize the behaviors that are going on around us. It's not too similar. I remember back in my cycling and triathlon days, those are the people that you're surrounding yourselves with. And so, training 14, 16 hours a week or 20 hours a week was just what everyone does, going to bed at 8 o'clock at night, so you can get up at 4 o'clock to train. That's just what happens. And you don't end up drinking on the weekend, on Saturday night into the late hours, or if you do, your performance is pretty poor. So
I know when I was in London, there was no triathlons for me, mate. It was going to bed at 4 o'clock in the morning, not getting up to train.
There was a bit of that, to be honest. So that was long after my triathlon days.
Yeah. So, JM, freedoms, obviously we've talked about it. We've known each other for, 12 or 13 years now, mate, and worked closely together over the years. And I know freedom is your business is called Better Business Freedom, but freedom is really, really a cornerstone of everything you do. And I know your family, I know how you live your life, and you walk the talk, shall we say. So for you, what does freedom mean? Because I think for a lot of business owners, and obviously I work in the agricultural space, so most of them are farmers, this word freedom is probably loaded fairly well. So how do you describe it to yourself?
Yeah, that's an interesting one, Ben. As you say, it's inherently different for every person. And I think the important thing is to take that time to understand and appreciate it. It comes back to that know thyself, and understanding what freedom is for you. So for me, I define it around choices and what am I obligated to do as opposed to what I choose to do. And so that's a huge hallmark. There's that story of the stonemasons. Are you familiar with that one?
Oh, I've got an idea, but I'm guessing our listeners won't, James.
Yeah, a traveller happens across a quarry, and there's a few stonemasons chipping away, cutting blocks out of the earth. And he stops and he asks the first one. He says, "Mate, what are you up to?" And he says, just cutting these blocks of stone, we're here from dawn until dusk, and it's hard work, and we get on with it. There's no other options about. And he walks over to the second guy who's 100 meters or so away, and he says to him, "Mate, what are you up to?" And he says, "Let me tell you, we're creating these blocks of stone to build the most magnificent cathedral that this side of Europe's ever seen." Yeah, and so I think it's very much that context and perception about what do you feel obligated to do, as opposed to what do you think called to do, and what are you choosing to do.
I think as time goes on, we lose that, I suppose, for lack of a better term, of why, don't we? It just becomes the routine of day in, day out again, frog in boiling water.
Yeah, absolutely, Ben. And I think it's just that opportunity to take those opportunities at a regular basis just to re-examine where we are and where we're headed and what we are choosing and what we're feeling obligated to, because the sand shift and we need to recognize that. Otherwise, we end up in places that we don't really want to be.
It's interesting, JM. One of the things that we work with heavily with our high-performing families is we work on defining prosperity. So what does prosperity mean to you? And a lot of the younger ones go, what the hell do you mean by prosperity, Ben? It's an old-fashioned word. But basically, we get families to sit down and go, okay, well, define what prosperity looks like for you, because prosperity can look great to one family, but horrible to another. One might say, I had one recently where someone said, we want 20,000 head of cattle. That's when we get to there, we're prosperous. That's a sign that we're prosperous. And others have said, well, we spend time together as a family and play and have fun and go on holidays and adventures. So trying to define what success or prosperity or enjoyment actually means to you. And I don't think many people stop and do that these days. It's just that treadmill problem.
Absolutely. People are so busy being busy and busy being successful that they often don't stop to reevaluate and reconsider. And so they become prisoners of their past. And that's often a situation. So, programs like the one that you are running, and that where people do get that time to step out of the business, into a space and into an arena that they can reconsider that. And for me, that's one of the most important things is how do we define success, and what does that look like? And it's the basis for everything. And, that's the other part of the business name in terms of better business freedom is, for me, quite often with businesses and with the business owners that I'm working on, one of the big ideas that I like them to take on is that it's about better, not more. And so people constantly chase more, and quite often more isn't actually better.
Give me an example, Jane.
Yeah, so quite often revenue is a target and just getting more revenue. However,
or more scale or size.
More scale or more size. However, is there a better way of getting that scale or size? Is it more about getting better profits rather than just revenue? Is it about producing a better quality product, a better quality service that's more appreciated by a target audience rather than a broader audience? So, who are we really trying to serve? And are we better off having better customers at the end of the day and refining who we're reaching out to? So in all of those regards, and this is where often people just try to do more of what they're already doing instead of finding better ways to do what they're already doing. And that's often where we find the burnout trap. People have lost their zest and their joy for doing what they do, and it's become a chore and obligation. They resent in one way or the other. Even when they're hugely successful, they might be raking in the dollars, they might be hitting all of their goals and that, but it's just become exhausting. And the prospect of having to work even harder in order to get more becomes something that just wears them down, just thinking about it, because they're already tapping out everything that they've got.
And that's what you've mentioned. And you mentioned when we first talked about doing this episode was being trapped in your past success. And I think for me, growing up on the land, and I'm sure most people who are listening have probably been taught this, is I was given a very, very strong work ethic. The story in my family was if you're not working hard, you're a lazy bum and you're not going to succeed. And if things get tough, the secret to success is just to work harder. And you've seen me over the last 15 years. You've known me where when things get tough, my natural stance is just to bear down, get some grit and just push harder. do you see that as a trap that people fall into, Jean-Marc, like the trapped in past success? Or can you unpack that for us? Because I think I understand, but I think it'd be good for everyone else to hear what you mean by that.
Yeah, absolutely, Ben. So I think, there's so many different versions of being trapped in our past success. And not just our own personal success, but also from our family, from our community, from our environment, because we very much absorb that and take that on board. And a lot of learning is unconscious. We're actually not conscious of what we learn. So over the years, we file away these beliefs and we hold on to them, even when they're no longer actually serving us. But we don't realize that they're no longer serving us. It's a little bit like a young child who climbs up on a sofa and then falls off. And for their young brain, the lesson that they take away is that sofas are dangerous. I need to stay away from a sofa. And that might be well and good for a 2 to 4-year-old or 5-year-old, but there's no point in carrying out your whole life being afraid of sofas. Yeah? And paradoxically, that's what happens to people in all kinds of different ways. So certainly, I think for a lot of people, and particularly I think there's it's even more entrenched in a country culture, is that hard work will get you where you want to go, and more hard work is what's required for success. And however, it seldom lives out. The most successful people are those who take the time to think about how they're approaching things, to take in what's changing, what's evolving, and shift and adapt with it. And that's what's required in business, is to go, yep, that's worked for us, and it's worked for us up to here. However, is it going to allow us to be successful at that next level? And that comes back to how we're defining success. And if we have a more holistic consideration of what success is, both in terms of time and development of ourselves, so spiritually, leadership from the leadership perspective, leadership within the family, leadership within the business, leadership within the community, then our health and well-being, contribution, all of these sorts of things, fun and sport, and all of those things need to be taken into consideration. It can't just all be about work. Work and career is a huge part of our life. I don't believe in the work-life balance. I think they're an integrated aspect. It can't just, the only route to success or holistic success is not just to finish yourself working relentlessly forevermore.
It's interesting. I heard a guy in America who you and I both know, Dan Sullivan, the coach over there, and he talks about 10 times thinking. And I love that. And it really resonated with me because he said basically, if you set a double your revenue goal, so let's say you're turning over $1 million and say, I want to get to 2 million, or let's say you're running 10,000 acres and you want to get 20,000 acres, that's relatively easy. Not easy to do is not the right word, but it's achievable, and it generally is achievable through just hard work. So you just got to work harder, and you can probably eke it out to 2 times, and maybe in some instances you can eke it out to 3 times. But if you think 10 times bigger, that completely changes the way you think. It's like, if I want to go from 10,000 acres to 100,000 acres, or I want to go from 2,000 head of cattle to 20,000 head of cattle, you've got to think completely differently. And I think that's a lot of the trap we fall into, is our goals that we set, whatever they are. So they could be a monetary goal or a business goal, or they could be a personal goal, but they just are so small that we just go, hard work's the easiest solution that's obvious to me.
That's right, Ben. Yeah, it's those incremental goals actually really compromise us in terms of our approach and our thinking. And so a huge part of working with businesses and business owners is to expand those goals or expand their vision and go, well, if we were to get there, what needs to change and how would things need to change? And then we start working on that now, as opposed to just working a little bit harder, because just working a little bit harder is a trap and it doesn't lead you to success. And also it comes down to, what are you working harder on? We've got those aspects within the business where we're working in the business on those types of tasks, as opposed to working on the business, which are those more strategic aspects of development. And most people go to work harder working in the business rather than on it. And I don't know if you recall the Waterboy story.
Yes, I do, but share it with everyone else. I love it. I've used it many times myself, so that to quantify between working on the business versus in the business.
Yeah, absolutely. So I grew up in Africa, in South Africa, and amongst a lot of the communities there's no running water. People go to rivers or they go to wells or some other source to collect water and then walk it back to the villages. And often those water sources are located away from the villages so as not to contaminate them. Now, in some villages, every family does that for themselves, and in other villages, there's people who, that's their task, that's their job, is they're water carriers, and these jobs are passed down through the generations. So one family might be a water carrying family, or a number of families are water carrying families. So there's this one young guy, and he got born into one of these water carrying families, and as soon as he became of age and strong enough, that's what he was required to do from dusk until dawn. And he knew that that was not what he wanted to do with his life. He had other aspirations. And after a couple of years of doing this, he decided one day that he couldn't live doing that forevermore. So he stopped carrying water from dusk to dawn, and in the first hour of every day, he did something else. And he was scorned by his family, and he was scorned by the rest of the village because he wasn't doing his utmost to bring as much revenue in for his family as possible. And over the course of 9 months, he wore that scorn and ridicule until one morning he completed his project. And what he had done was he had dug a metre of trench every day, put a pipe in it and covered it. Dug another metre the next day and put a pipe in and covered it until he could turn on the tap at the gates of the village. And so every water carrying days were over. So I very much say for businesses and business owners, what are you doing? Are you just carrying more buckets of water to get ahead? Or are you going to lay some hard work and get a tap set up?
Yep, I love that story, JM. He managed to create a business rather than a job.
Exactly. He created freedom. There's freedom for himself and freedom for the rest of the villagers, just because he chose to do something slightly different and thought about it. So, yeah, and that's often what's required, is just for us to think differently about how we're approaching things, and then in the same number of working hours, we can achieve and accomplish something entirely different.
So, JM, I want to get on to the other point I've heard you say plenty of times, is the waiting for later trap. How about, rather than me say too much about it, how about you unpack that? Because I've suffered from that, as you know, quite well, my whole career, and since I've known you, is the later trap. So do you want to unpack that for us?
Yeah, it's fantastic, Ben. That's something that I hear a lot, particularly when, I first come into the business or start working with business owners, is that we go through what are the goals and what are the outcomes and that. And quite often they'll say, well, once we get to this, then we'll be able to do that. Yeah. And quite often it's once we hit some level of target, whether it's revenue, profit or whatever, then we'll start living the life that we want to live. Then we'll take the holidays that we want to, then we'll take the time off that we want to, then we'll pick the kids up from school earlier or whatever it might be. And the issue with that is that later never comes. We only ever live in the present moment. I've had a couple of tragedies in my life, but they've also been very important teaching moments to me, is that there may never be later, and that today is all that we have. So what I rather encourage people to do is to think of how can we get a little bit of that future right now, right here, today, this week, this month, this quarter, rather than 3 years' time or 5 years' time or whatever, which may never come along, or we may not be able to get to enjoy it in the same way when that time does come along. So there's a great book, I think it's called Die with Zero, that talks about, it's not really about exiting from the world with no money. It's more about the principle of doing things at the right time in life, or the right stage of life. And so too many people say, I'll go and travel when I'm retired or whatever it might be. However, will you have the energy? Will you have the mobility and that to do the things that actually bring you enjoyment at that point? So I think it's really important that we take that into consideration and ensure that we having that as a part of our success plan.
So, Jane, you walk into a lot of businesses and I'd call you, I don't know if you call yourself this, a bit of a turnaround specialist in the sense that you walk into businesses and usually they're very successful businesses. Like from the outside, you look at them and go, wow, these businesses are doing amazing. But the owners come to you and say, I've had enough. Like, I'm out. And when you walk into those businesses, you see great businesses, great systems and processes, lots of profit coming in. What's the common themes you see when you walk into those businesses first up, Jane? And the reason I'm asking is I'm interested to see that because I deal with a lot of families that are doing really well and driven and motivated and successful. But I'd just be interested to hear, because you deal outside of the ag space, what are those common things where you walk in and go, I can expect these 5 things to happen or be said?
I think most commonly, Ben, one of the things is, people don't re-examine the way that they do things. They just do it because they've always done it that way. And however, most of the businesses that I am working with are transitioning or have transitioned from being small businesses into being medium-sized businesses. And so the owners have dominated the management of the business. And what usually needs to happen next is that the professional management team needs to be put in place, both to ensure the ongoing sustainability of the business and its survivability beyond the owner, and also to create that freedom for the owner from the business so that they can actually get their time back from it and structure their life in the way that they want to. So quite often homegrown talent is an issue or a limiter. So there've been people who've been with the business from its inception and they've never known anything else other than that business. And so they haven't been exposed to larger business and how things happen in larger businesses, both from a governance perspective, from a structure, from a process, a systems perspective. And it's very difficult to elevate or lift those people up to the level that's required in order to take that next step. So we need to put a plan in place. There's some difficult or tough conversations quite often around that, and that those people have often been elevated as the business grows, but they've kind of hit their ceiling outside of going and getting experience across 3 or 4 other businesses. So that's often one of the big things that we have to do is have a look at the structure, who's employed in the business, what capacity and capability, what talent. And sometimes the people that are there are exceptional and they can, with sufficient mentoring and coaching, be elevated to that next level. So that would be one. The other one would be a number of the things that we've already talked about in terms of people not re-examining, not looking at who are they really serving, to what degree and to what outcome, and are they channeling and funding their energy to the right audience, and redefining that audience. And it comes back to that principle of better, not more. So, I've seen 10x results where we've gotten rid of 60% of the customers. 60% of the services that the business was putting out, and refine that down to a single or 2 or 3 services rather than having 10. So it's often a lot of these things that are counterintuitive from a traditional sort of business practice. It's really a role of questioning everything that's there.
Do you find the owners, because the owners come to you, and the reason I'm digging into this for everyone who's listening is this is the story of most farming families when you've got an intergenerational transition. You've got mum and dad who get to sort of 50s to 60s and, they've had a lot of success. They're in what I call the acceleration phase. It's where everything's coming together and the business is taking off. And then you've got the next generation coming through who are in their 20s that are hungry and keen and driven. And so there's exactly the same problems happening here, except it's very difficult in a family business to sack a parent or a child. Not impossible. You should sometimes. I've seen it happen, but it is hard. And so do you find that the owners or the current generation, for the lack of a better term, are probably half of the problem? They just won't let go?
Absolutely. Letting go is such a key aspect, and it's different for different individuals. Some people can just do it once they recognize what's required.
I'm out.
Yeah. And for other people, it's a process, and sometimes it's, depending on what's being let go of, it can take them 2 to 3 years to either build up the confidence, build up the awareness and the recognition of it needing to happen. And quite often along the way, they need to feel like they've tested out a few other options before they get to that point of letting go.
They've got to be ready to take action.
They absolutely do have to be ready. And that's why it's very hard to have a cookie cutter approach. If you're truly working with the people, as you would know, every single family would be different. They're not all the same. There's different variables at play, and it's about trying to help them craft a plan that's right for their individual freedom and at a pace that they can actually work at.
So, Jane, one of the specific, I want to use a really specific example here. I think this would be good to get your take on this because, again, you don't come from a farming background, so you don't have any of the stories attached to what should and shouldn't be done. But I'll use a fictional family where you've got mum and dad who have, say, in their 50s, have been hyper successful, hard workers and the way they've done things has made them successful. Next generation's coming through, wanting to do things differently, looking at mum and dad going, holy dooly, you're working 70, 80, 90 hours a week. And they're going, well, look, we're happy to work hard. We just don't want to do necessarily the exact same hard work as mum and dad. And they're looking ahead going, this isn't really what I want to sign up for. And then you've got down the other side, you've got mum and dad looking down and going, well, hard work and sacrifice is what made us successful. These lazy, layabout, entitled next generation aren't going to have what it takes to be able to do what we've done, shall we say. How would you approach something like that, JM, if it was in a family business setting?
It's an interesting thing, Ben, because I think there's a distinction that needs to get drawn between hard work and long work. And I'm an advocate for hard work. It doesn't need to be 70, 80 hours. You can work really hard, 40 hours a week. So I think that's a paradigm shift that people need to think of. You can work really, really hard plowing a field with a hand plow. But why would you when there's tractors? And there's better and smarter tractors these days. So I think that's the distinction and again, it's letting go of the past. Imagine if, we've always been really successful at plowing these fields with a hand plow and an ox. That leads you down a path. So it's exploring those aspects and bringing new and fresh ideas in and being willing to be open to those ideas. And so a huge part of it is humility. What I find differentiates the businesses and business owners that succeed and those who just carry on where they have been and don't make as much traction is that willingness to be humble. And to probably, if I look back, over the 20 years or so that I've been doing this, the clients that I've taken on who have achieved the most are those who don't believe they know everything. And those who believe that they know it all, or most of it, they're the ones that continue to struggle because they're not willing to let go of the past.
Yep. Curiosity is a superpower, isn't it? How else could we do this?
100%. Yeah, absolutely. And not believing that we know it all, because there are other people out there that can add value and add information, add a fresh perspective, new questions that we hadn't contemplated in a different approach.
It's funny, Jay, and one of the things, and I don't know if you've noticed this, mate, but one of the things that I've noticed is some of the most hyper-successful families that I know, and in every measure, they're smashing it out of the park. They're doing really well in their family. They're doing really well financially. They've got some freedom. They've got just a cracking situation they're in. And they're the ones that I usually find when they talk to me, they're like, oh, we don't know, Ben. Tell us more. I'm curious. How could we do this better? They've got this real open mindset. And on the converse is I find that often the ones that are doing or not the worst, but aren't achieving what they want to achieve in their lives are the ones that are most closed-minded. Like we know what's got to be done. They're not willing to listen. They're not willing to question. There's this lack of curiosity in them. And I could see it really clear. And it really shocked me when I first noticed this quite a number of years ago. Was I'd sit in front of these people and go, well, why are you asking my opinion? You're hyper successful. But it was the ones that were successful would ask me, what answers have I got? Or they'd even ask the person that was unsuccessful saying, what's your opinion, mate? What do you think? To try and, because they just said, well, we don't know what we don't know, and we might learn something here.
Absolutely, man. It's that whole fixed versus growth mindset, and that willingness to, I have this inherent belief that people have the answers within them. They just need to be provided with the right questions, and quite often we're asking ourselves the wrong questions over and over. We don't even realize we appreciate it. So bringing those people that are willing to be open to new questions, and then consider them outside of the paradigms that they're currently sitting within, are those that really do succeed, as you say.
So this, I think we've already touched on this, but I wrote the question down before we started because I think it's a really important one, JM. But what's the hardest thing for business owners to let go of?
I think the hardest thing for them to let go of is how they've achieved success to date, because it's so ingrained in them. There's a whole lot of hard-fought lessons to get them to the point where they're at. And relinquishing how they're currently doing things is a big ask for people. Yeah? And so that can feel quite threatening. And so constructing a plan and constructing a roadmap from that current state to the future state is something that's really important in helping people along that journey. So I'd say that's probably the most difficult thing for them to let go of, particularly when it's become a core part of their identity and how they see themselves. And so, we come back to this aspect of hard work. And quite often people conflate hard work and long hours as opposed to more productive ways of work.
Yeah, that identity is a real problem. And I think for me personally, my view is that I see a lot of rural producers and successful business owners transitioning into the dreaded R word, retirement. So transitioning back from that full-time role. And even if it's stepping back, not away, is that whole identity of I am this successful person that runs this business. It's very, very challenging for them. And then, when I stepped out of my financial advice business, that I was Ben, the successful financial advisor that had a whole lot of clients, a really successful business. We were winning industry awards. And then all of a sudden I was Ben, the lawnmower, and walks his daughter to school every day. It was really confronting for me. And I got a taste of how hard it is when you have a label or you have your self-worth tied up in what you do, and then that changes. That can be really uncomfortable.
And especially when it's even tied into how you do it. And Ben, what you did trigger for me there in terms of contemplating what do people find most difficult to let go of, I would say that for the majority who are going through that period, either transitioning to a new management team or putting a professional management team in, or you're the next generation, in your instance, it's actually letting go of control. And so, when you're at it 60 hours a week or whatever it is, and you're in every aspect of the business, there's a sense or perception of control from being across everything all the time. And then stepping back and leading in a different way and trusting others and not having to be across everything that you managing or leading in a different way. That's often the thing that they struggle with the most, is letting go of control or that perception of control. So is that something you find?
Oh, Jean-Marc, it's not something I suffer from, of course, as you know. Yeah.
And with the families that you're working with?
Yeah, I do. I mean, it takes time, JM, I think, to build trust. And this is what I quite often tell the current generation. So mum and dad, as I'll say, I'll talk about the next generation coming in, and they might make flippant comments like, I don't know whether they've got what it takes to take over, and, they're not working as hard as they should, or they don't get it. And my statement to them is just give them a bit of time to develop. If you go back in time and look at what you were when you're in your 20s, And that's really confronting for them. And then the next generation, when they're coming through in their 20s and saying, mum and dad won't change. They're so brittle and rigid. And, this is too hard a thing to steer the ship. And I say the same thing to them. I'm like, just be patient. Mum and dad have been in control for 20, 30 years and they've smashed it out of the park in so many ways. You just got to be patient with them actually just going through this transition and be kind while you're going through it and realize that one day you're going to be sitting in their shoes, having the same conversation with your son or your daughter and getting them to try and realize that, you don't have to conquer Rome or build Rome in one day.
Absolutely, Ben. That whole aspect of how we do build and gain trust. And I think it's something that very much comes through. People often ask me, what's your superpower? What's your gift and that? And I guess part of it is being able to connect really left field ideas together. Having worked across so many different industries and so many different businesses and having ADHD, my brain kind of connects all weird concepts and ideas and a lot of outside the box thinking. However, I think it's an intuitive capacity to determine what's not being spoken about, what's not being said, and what's not being seen within the business, and then bringing that forward in a way that doesn't threaten, so that we can put it on the table. Because once it's on the table, then everybody can start working towards it. And as you said, having some of these things that people are thinking but not necessarily saying being brought out into the open just creates massive alignment and also can foster deep trust, because it's no longer the monster under the bed.
Wise words, JM, wise words. Sometimes the elephant in the room just has to get pointed out, and that takes a whole lot of pressure off. So I've just seen it too many times over my career of doing this is naming it in the room. And at the end of the meeting, even if there's not a solution, it's just naming it. And everyone goes, oh, we feel so much relief that it's just been named and spoken about without any solutions. And I'm like, but you haven't got a solution for it. They said, yeah, but we've just talked about it. We've been trying to talk about it for 25 years. So, yeah, I think that's sage advice. So, JM, we're starting to come to the end, mate, and get wound up. Books. You've always got a book recommendation. Most of the ones that you give me, I read. That's where I get most of mine from. Mate, any recommendations for books that someone could maybe read over the next short while?
Well, I think probably tying it into the theme of this, because as you say, Ben, there's so many great books out there, and they've been a real treasure for me in terms of learning and development. There's Marshall Goldsmith wrote a book called What Got You Here Won't Get You There. And so I think that's probably really apt for this sort of topic or genre. And it's really about leadership. It's about a number of different principles of leadership and ways and approaches that people take that may have got them success to a certain point, but then that caps them out and presents a ceiling for them and moving further forward. So, whether you're leading a family, leading a business, leading a family business, elevating yourself as a leader and developing others as leaders around you is absolutely critical skill. So that's a book that there's a huge amount of value in. If you're willing to be open and willing to be humble and willing to be self-reflective.
Which is terrifying. What about surrounding yourself with other people, JM? It's just something that popped into my head there listening. You're being a leader in a business, but what about surrounding yourself with the right people that think differently?
Yeah, I think it's such a valuable process to find a group of people that are somewhat outside of the people that we speak to every day, because what we tend to end up with is an echo chamber. There's just people who just reinforce our existing paradigms and what we believe. And so finding a community, and I think that's the important word, and it's such a massive element of happiness and well-being, is finding a community that potentially challenges us, that pushes us to be our best. And that's not just to work harder, but be our best in all the different ways in terms of leadership, in terms of thinking and that. And so, that's been an inherent part of how I've helped businesses over the years, is bringing together communities of people. So that, hey, that you're not alone in the challenges and difficulties that you're facing, that you're not entirely unique in that perspective. And then people who are further ahead of you that can inspire you, And then people who perhaps still walking the path that you've walked, that you can lend some inspiration and ideas to, and also help you realize how far you have come already. There's a lot of value in turning around and looking back down the mountain rather than staring up at it all the time.
Couldn't agree more. And that's a big reason why we have our high-performing families community, our families that we get together with. What the two things that I always mention is connection and belonging. People are craving that, to be connecting and belonging to something. So a community that's, again, not just the same old people that are the echo chamber. And the other one is you want to be in a tribe or a community of people that challenge you, but also champion you, raise you up, because we don't always need to be challenged. Sometimes we need to be championed and say, JM, you're on a cracking job, mate. You're right on the right path. Great job, especially when we get our times when we start to question ourselves, etc. So I love that, challenge and champion. I talk about it all the time.
Yeah, absolutely, man. Being celebrated for doing hard things as opposed to just achieving huge results,
Yeah, awesome. JM, where can people find more about you online if they want to read about Jean-Marc?
So, Ben, I'm available at betterbusinessfreedom.com. And, I'm not so hot on socials. I do have a LinkedIn profile, so people can contact me there. But all the other socials and stuff, don't have much time for or interest in.
Yeah, that's not freedom, is it?
Not for me. It's a trap.
Awesome. Hey, JM, my last question before we kick off, mate. I like to ask every guest if I haven't seen them on the podcast before. And I think this is a really good self-reflective one. And I know you had a massive change in your early 30s. And so outside of that change that you made, if you could go back in a time machine, back to, say, when you're in your mid to late 20s, or even any real important point in your life, what's one piece of advice you give young JM?
Ooh. That's a good one, Ben. Live a life true to yourself. Make choices and decisions for coherence, not convenience. So, too often in life, it's tempting to take the convenient path rather than the coherent path. And, certainly I've got a number of experiences of making those choices or decisions, sometimes on a business level and sometimes on a personal level. Yeah. Choose coherence over convenience.
Love it. Awesome, Jean-Marc. Well, look, mate, thank you very much for today. I know getting you on the podcast is a big coup for me to finally have it happen. And as you said, you were with me when I first started talking about it and launched the podcast. So I want to say to you, thanks for all your help over the years. Really appreciate it. I guarantee I wouldn't be anywhere near where I am today if I hadn't had someone like you challenging me and championing me. And sometimes those challenges have been very, very challenging. So I just want to say thanks. And I love the way you're serving the business community, Jane.
Thanks, Ben. It's been an absolute privilege to be part of your journey and be there at the inception of the Financial Bloke and then the podcast too. And, it's one of those things I remember, you had a fair bit of feedback at the time that it was crazy. What are you thinking of doing? And just need to knuckle down and do more of what you are doing. And it's absolutely delightful to see the freedom that you've created for yourself and for your family. And, right from the outset, I knew you were a great coach, even though you were hiding away as a financial planner. And it's wonderful to see you liberated and living that life.
Awesome. Thanks, JM. Righto, mate. We'll put JM's contact details in the show notes. And we'll look to, I'm going to have you back on again. We'll find a great topic to talk about. Thanks very much for your time today, JM.
Fantastic. Thanks, Ben. Take care.
All right. That's a wrap with Jean-Marc. As you can tell, I've known Jean-Marc a long time. We're very good mates, and he's been absolutely integral to my progress and success over the years. And I think I mentioned at the end about challenging and championing within your community. Jean-Marc has challenged me more than anyone in my life, and it's always been uncomfortable, but it's always created great results for me and in business. A couple of things to take away with you, just two things. First, it's not failure that limits most people, it's success. The recipe that once worked can quickly become the cage that keeps you stuck. I want you to remember that, especially the older generation. You might be coming through, you've seen all the success, what you've got over the last 20 or 30 years. Maybe what's going to make you successful in the next phase, especially with the next generation coming in, maybe that won't be the same thing that'll make you successful. And secondly, beware of the little stories we tell ourselves. i.e., we can only do X once Y happens, or first we need to, then we can. It sounds really, really sensible, but they're just excuses that delay growth and freedom. And I can tell you now, you'll always move the goalpost. That's what high performers do as we go, we'll do X, Y, Z once we get to this measured goal. And then invariably we change the goalposts again. That's what we do. I know that's what I always do, constantly changing the goalposts. Now, if this episode struck a chord with you, I want you to share it with another farming family who needs to hear it. And if you want to know more about what we do at Agricoach, head on over to agricoach.com.au. Until next time, remember, it's more important who you are than what you've got. I'll see you next time.